If you were a little sprog in the early 90s and found yourself plonked in front of a friend's Mega Drive, chances are you had no idea what was going on, only that there were turtles, there were foot soldiers, and you were having the time of your life. If Hyperstone Heist was the game in that slot, you could be forgiven entirely for walking away convinced you just played Turtles in Time. The sprites were similar, the music was oddly familiar, and the gameplay had that same frantic side-scrolling, sewer-smashing charm that could be found in arcades. But years later, when you finally got your hands on a Super Nintendo and booted up the real Turtles in Time, something didn't quite add up. Levels were different, bosses were missing, the soundtrack wasn't the same. That's when the existential crisis sets in. Because it turns out you didn't play Turtles in Time at all, you played the other one. This curious little odyssey is something altogether stranger, a game that appears to be a simple port at first glance, only to slowly unravel into a bizarre remix that leaves you questioning your memory, your childhood, and whether Konami themselves had fallen into an alternate dimension back in 1992. So with that said, join me today as we investigate this Phantom Pizza Party, the weird, wonderful, slightly off beat-em-up that lives in its Super Nintendo counterpart Shadow. Hello ladies and gentlemen, Big Daddy Top Hat here. This is Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the Hyperstone Heist, the Mandela effect of Turtles games. Yeah! The classic Turtles games from the 8 and 16-bit era were amazing, right? The franchise was at the peak of its popularity, and many of the games that were being published were sublime. What's just as cool is that the modern release, Shredder's Revenge, captures these glory days, delivering a brawler that's up there with the very best. We've genuinely been spoiled lately with some of the best beat-em-ups in years, but here's the mad bit, you can now grab a bunch of them for pocket change. Use my links to snag Shredder's Revenge for under $15, Streets of Rage 4 for less than $10, and one of my all-time favourites, Double Dragon Gaiden, for under a $5. I've got massive discounts on thousands of games via the pinned comment, including up to 40% off brand new games like Fatal Fury City of the Wolves, the PC version of Stellar Blade, and Expedition 33. Every purchase helps support the channel and bags you a bargain, so happy shopping and hope you enjoyed this video. There were many Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles titles over the years, some memorable, some less so, but in March 1991 Konami unleashed what many still consider the magnum opus of the franchise, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Turtles in Time. This sensational 4-player arcade beat-em-up didn't just top the Turtles games that came before it, it drop-kicked them into the Technodrome. Just a few months later, the game would of course find its way into homes via the Super Nintendo, albeit with only 2-player support. But despite this, many fans argue that the SNES version was even better, thanks to brand new levels, exclusive bosses, and tweaks that made the experience feel tighter and more polished than ever. It's rare for a home port to outshine its arcade counterpart, but in this case, a strong case can be made that it did exactly that. But then, in December of 1992, something strange happened. The Sega Mega Drive, finally getting its turn in the Turtles spotlight, received a completely different game. One that looked like Turtles in Time, it sounded like Turtles in Time, but what players got was something altogether different. At this point in time, both Konami and Capcom had exclusivity deals with Nintendo, a business arrangement that would keep their biggest arcade juggernauts, such as Turtles in Time and the original Street Fighter II, firmly chained to the Super Nintendo. This meant that if Sega fans wanted a taste of the action, publishers had to get creative. So instead of simply porting Turtles in Time to the Mega Drive, which legally and technically wasn't on the cards, Konami did the next best thing. They made an entirely different game that just happened to look suspiciously similar, a clever workaround if ever there was one. Besides, Turtles in Time's conversion on the SNES leaned heavily on Mode 7 effects, fancy graphical flourishes bespoke to Nintendo's hardware. The Mega Drive, on the other hand, wasn't built for such visual wizardry, so Konami decided to design something more tailored to Sega's strengths. But the end result, well, you boot it up and you'd be forgiven for thinking you were playing Turtles in Time anyway. From the get-go, it's Deja Vu Central. The character select screen near identical, the intro cutscene practically a remix. Once again we see April O'Neil reporting live in front of a Statue of Liberty, but this time Shredder doesn't just steal the statue. Oh no, he shrinks the entire island of Manhattan, because why settle for petty theft when you can go full supervillain with a shrinking ray from Dimension X? This bombastic little setup gives the game its name, the Hyperstone Heist, and launches the Turtles on a mission to restore their hometown to its full glorious size. The first stage drops you straight into the sewer system, because of course it does. This is the Ninja Turtles after all. But again, if you've played Turtles in Time, you'll be doing double takes already. The sprites, the animations, the sound effects, it all feels just familiar enough to mess with your memory. And that, my friends, is where things start to get weird. As the first stage kicks off, it quickly becomes clear that while the Hyperstone Heist might look like Turtles in Time, it's far from a carbon copy. The level layouts are completely different. No time-travelling pirate ships or prehistoric dino stampedes here. But the sprite work, oh, that's identical. The turtle animations, the foot soldier designs, even the goofy pratfalls and flailing punches, all lifted straight from the Super Nintendo game. It becomes apparent very quickly that Hyperstone Heist isn't so much a new experience as it is a reconstruction, built from the leftover bricks of Turtles in Time. Think of it as a remix album made using the same instruments, just played in a different order. Controls feel near identical too. Movement, attack speed, the way the pizzas drop to replenish health. It's all the same. And before long, the familiar wheeled robot enemies roll in, just as they did in the SNES game's opening stage. By the time you reach the second half of this level, things feel even more suspicious. The backgrounds in this section are virtually identical to those used in Stage 2 of the SNES version. The fire hydrant that spews water at passers-by, still here. But this time Konami added a twist. Now there are cars barreling through the streets that can run you over. New obstacles, same old chaos. Still, these borrowed assets and reused set pieces explain exactly why so many people walk away from Hyperstone Heist convinced they played Turtles in Time. It's not their fault Konami practically designed the confusion, and the illusion continues. The stage soon dips back underground into yet another sewer, this time wetter, muddier, and still crawling with colour-swapped foot soldiers. And if you've got sharp eyes, you'll spot yet another recycled foe. That alien-looking menace from the surfing stage in the arcade game makes its reappearance here, now just awkwardly plopped into a tunnel like someone forgot which folder they were dragging enemies out of. The boss of the opening stage is none other than Leatherhead, yet another familiar face recycled straight from Turtles in Time. Originally appearing in the Western-themed train level, yes, the one where time-travelling turtles battled on a moving locomotive, Leatherhead returns here without a hint of explanation. No train, no cowboy hat, just vibes. After that showdown, the game takes a sudden turn seaward, into a stage called the Mysterious Ghost Ship. Here the turtles inexplicably hop onto surfboards and begin gliding across open waters. While the setting is technically new, the surfing mechanic itself is once again borrowed directly from the earlier game. Then again, it's not plagiarism if you're stealing from yourself, right? On the surf, players are pestered by robotic flying enemies that, to Konami's credit, do appear to be new. They're certainly not recognisable from anything in Turtles or Time, or TIT, as we'll now refer to it for sheer comedic and convenience purposes moving forward. Once the turtles clamber aboard the titular ghost ship, the level does finally start to show a bit of unique personality. The interior is grim and gothic, with a frankly hilarious painting of Shredder hanging ominously on the wall like he's auditioning for Ghostwatch. The sky visible through the battered hull is a sickly shade of purple, and the whole place gives off major discount Castlevania boat level energy. Barrels roll towards you because of course they do. It's not a beat 'em up unless something round is trying to flatten you. And while foot soldiers return in bulk, the developers also drop in a few more familiar foes from TIT to keep nostalgia on standby. Eventually the turtles make it to shore, diving straight into a cavern level where the hazards go from slightly nautical to mildly lethal. Falling stalactites, precariously placed dynamite, and yet more palette-swapped enemies try to halt your progress. But it all culminates in a boss fight with Rocksteady, now fighting solo without Bebop by his side. He's at least changed his clothes, which is more than most 90s action figures could say, but in terms of challenge, not exactly what I'd call a rhinoceros stampede. Still, the game rolls on, and so do the questions. Is this a bold reimagining, a half-hearted port, or the video game equivalent of Deja Vu? Let's keep going. Stage 3, or Scene 3 as the game rather grandiosely calls it, sees the turtles leaving the dank caverns behind, and apparently making their way towards Shredder's hideout. Along the way, players will encounter another barrage of familiar enemies as they pass a large, very Eastern-looking building. Eastern-orientated, you might say. The Orient, if you will. See what I did there? You're welcome. Inside, things take a dramatic tonal shift. Suddenly, you're dodging traps, leaping over spike pits and navigating mechanical contraptions, and just like that, it feels less like a Turtles game and more like a lost level from Gambari Goemon, or Mystical Ninja to some of you, which, funnily enough, was also developed by Konami. Coincidence, or just more asset-swapping shenanigans from a dev team on a deadline? And while many of the traps feel comically old-fashioned, swinging blades, rolling logs and collapsing floors, there's also the occasional laser beam, because why not? Historical accuracy is for nerds. The boss of this stage is Tatsu, a fully original addition to the roster and the first human enemy we've fought so far. He's tough too, lobbing projectiles while a constant wave of foot soldiers try to reduce you to turtle soup. A decent challenge if nothing else. Then comes Scene 4, dramatically titled The Gauntlet. And unfortunately, it lives up to its name. Not because it's hard, but because it's a gauntlet of recycled content. We're back in yet another cave, how thrilling, but this time the floor is coated in water, so the game can justify reusing those alien-like swimming enemies from earlier. Things quickly get lazier. First, you fight a palette-swapped Leatherhead, then a palette-swapped Rocksteady, then you guessed it, a palette-swapped Tatsu. 3 bosses you've already defeated, now colour-coded for your inconvenience. This isn't a boss rush, it's a padding parade. But at long last, a real boss arrives. An airborne version of Baxter Stockman, flying around like a wasp at a picnic, hurling out endless robotic minions. He's annoying, sure, but at least he's new, and at this point, that's all we can really ask for. Defeat him and you're rewarded with a glimpse of a Technodrome, our next destination, and the final level of the game. The Technodrome stage is a hodgepodge of recycled elements from the SNES version, but halfway through we get another returning boss, Krang, in his giant mech suit, just as he appeared in Tit. Because if you're going to steal, you might as well steal from the best. Then it's elevator time, because as we all know, no beat-em-up is complete without a long, awkward elevator sequence where the game throws everything it's got at you in a desperate bid to drain your last few lives. At the bottom of this shaft, both literally and metaphorically, lies the final boss, Super Shredder, because of course it's Super Shredder, just like in the Super Nintendo version of Tit. After a fairly intense showdown, defeating him restores Manhattan to its proper size, setting the world right and cueing the end credits. Order is restored, the universe is saved, and the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles are once again free to do what they do best: eat pizza and shout cowabunga at inappropriate volumes. So that was a full breakdown of every stage and key moment in the Hyperstone Heist. And now that we've taken the plunge into this curious Mega Drive title, it's time to ask the all-important question: how does it stack up next to Turtles in Time? Which is truly the better game? Well, let's be honest, the Hyperstone Heist is shameless. So many of its assets, animations, enemy types and sound effects are directly recycled from Tit. It borders on daylight robbery. At times it feels like Konami slapped together a Frankenstein's monster of the game under the assumption that no child in 1992 could afford both a SNES and a Mega Drive. So who would ever notice? And to some degree, they were probably right. But that's also why so many people to this day confuse the two titles. Some think they're ports of the same game. Others, even more tragically, believe Hyperstone Heist is some kind of butchered Mega Drive version of the arcade original. Yet when you look past the recycled bits, when you take the time to actually analyse what's new, Hyperstone Heist holds its own. It has mostly original levels, a different storyline, and a handful of unique bosses. It is undeniably a different game. Now, is it better? That's where things get tricky. Many fans write it off entirely due to the amount of reused content, and if you've played the arcade version of Turtles in Time or its SNES port, that's understandable. But viewed in isolation without the looming shadow of Tit hanging over it, the Hyperstone Heist is a genuinely solid beat-em-up. In fact, aside from the Streets of Rage trilogy, it's arguably one of the best examples of the genre on the Mega Drive. It's fast, responsive, visually appealing, and just plain fun. That said, it's hard to elevate it to the same pedestal as Turtles in Time for one simple reason: scope. The SNES game feels bigger, it has more stages, greater variety, and the wild time travel premise gives it a charm and spectacle that Hyperstone Heist never quite matches. One sends you leaping through history, the other has you fighting in another cave. Again. It's amusing that for a game about shrinking Manhattan, the Hyperstone Heist does end up feeling like a smaller, less epic experience overall. A bite-sized version of something grander, a compact cousin to Turtles in Time if you will. Still, despite its trimmed-down feel, the game isn't without value. The number of entirely new stages and original boss fights ensure that the Hyperstone Heist is more than just a lazy retread. It's a game absolutely worth playing, whether you've already completed Turtles in Time a dozen times or not. No, it's not the best in the series, but it is an essential curiosity, a fascinating example of how the same developer in the same era could create two different interpretations of the same franchise, simply based on which console they were working with. A bold, creative strategy that made the 16-bit era so uniquely brilliant. Don't forget, you can now grab a bunch of the best modern beat-em-ups for pocket change. Use my links to snag Shredder's Revenge for under $15, Streets of Rage 4 for less than $10, and one of my all-time favourites, Double Dragon Gaiden, for under a $5. I've got massive discounts on thousands of games via the pinned comment, including up to 40% off the brand new Fatal Fury City of Dwarves, the PC version of Stellar Blade, and Expedition 33. Every purchase helps support the channel and bags you a bargain at the same time. Happy shopping, and cheerio.